Alright guys, here is run through number 1 for flipped classroom. So the beginning of each of these lectures is going to be the same as they always are. You are going to answer the bell ringer on your bell ringer sheet. If you run out of time for answering the question, you can always go back and exit out of the slideshow itself and just look at each slide individually. But bell ringer for today is, what topic or topics are you looking forward to most and why? So we'll be analyzing primary sources, which we did last semester. We'll be going over the Russian Revolution, totalitarian regimes, Chinese Revolution, Indian Revolution, the Roaring Twenties, obviously World War II, which I'm sure most of you will find the most interesting, Cold War, Korean War, Vietnam War, communism as the cause for Cold War, Korean War, Vietnam War, Eisenhower, as in President Dwight D. Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon, and terrorism, specifically the attack on 9/11. So go ahead and fill in your boxes for your responses. All right. So first slide we have here, title slide, as always, go ahead and put 7.1, Goodbye Tsar Nicholas, because Russia used to be an empire as opposed to a regular old country. All right, so each of these slides is going to go through the way that it normally would, bullet point by bullet point by bullet point. Make sure to get everything down. If you run out of time, go ahead and look at each of the slides individually without the voiceover, or my suggestion is you actually do that first and then go through it with me talking. But first one, we have autocrats regain control. An autocrat is someone with absolute control and doesn't listen to anybody else. So you have Alexander III, who takes control and wants to go back to that idea of autocracy. But he has a lot of harsh measures to kind of get rid of these revolutionaries that tried to take control and overthrow the Tsar and his family. He decided to start censoring all of the publications that were put out there. Anything that was said that was bad against the government, gone, and you were put in prison or killed for it. Also created detailed reports on students. Everything that you ever did in school was recorded, was written down to make sure that you were never going to be one of those revolutionary people that tried to rebel against the Tsar, and that everything you did was to help the country and the Tsar and make sure that he maintained power. If you were found to be a revolutionary, you were sent to Siberia. I don't know if you know this, but Siberia is a little cold. And nobody really wants to live in Siberia because everybody just pretty much dies there. Russia is a very large country, but most of the country is Siberia. Nobody lives there. Nobody wants to go there. He as in Alexander III, declares that Russian is the official language. You would think that they already had an official language by this point, but it's the first time. Also, he starts to persecute the Jews. We like to ignore this part of history, but a lot of Russians don't like the Jews either, kind of like Hitler. But a little bit of Hitler before the Hitler. All right, so you have Nicholas II. He's going to continue the autocracy of Alexander III. Remember, autocracy is complete absolute power of one being or their family. Problem is that he didn't change with the country. The country started to revolutionize in terms of the economy and industry. They start to industrialize, and he doesn't keep up with them. He's still stuck in the past. So Russia's going to start industrializing. Remember, this is a good amount of time, almost 100 years probably, behind the rest of the world, or at least our other major world powers. But the factories are going to double. They're going to both double in size and double in number. But they're still behind the West. They're still going to be decades behind Great Britain, France, the United States. They are one of the big steel producers in the world, one of the biggest even. Part of the reason why they are such big steel producers is because they have a need for it. They need to create the Trans-Siberian Railway, which is going to be the world's longest rail line ever. But they do have a lot of problems, the same problems that we've looked at with some other areas at the beginning of industrialization. You have low wages that people want to improve. You have poor working conditions. A lot of people were getting hurt. You have child labor. And because of all these problems, you have the beginning of strikes. These strikes are what leads to the beginning of this revolution in Russia. So you get something called the proletariat. The proletariat is the new name for these workers of the Industrial Revolution. And they're a group that forms under the ideas of Karl Marx. Karl Marx is essentially the one that creates communism. But he believed that the proletariat will rise up and rule the world because they are numbers. They are the largest group in Russia and one of the largest groups in the world. So why wouldn't they want to rebel against the authorities that are in power and get what they want in order to make their lives better? But you have two different sides of it. These people that follow Marxists, on one side you have the Mensheviks. They're moderate. They want to establish a power base first. They want to get as many people as they can before they begin a revolution. Where on the other side of things, you have the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks are extremely radical, and they don't care about having to boost this power base first. They want to get into it as much as possible. They believe that if you have a few people that are willing to sacrifice everything for change, that your revolution is going to be successful, and you might as well start it now. So the leader of this Bolshevik group is Vladimir Lenin. You've probably heard his name at one point or another, but he's probably one of the most famous Russians. He's the one that's going to create this entire revolution in Russia. He's extremely engaging. He's a great leader. He's a man of the people as a whole. He's not worried about the individual. He's worried about the whole. What is going to make the most people happy? He's also an excellent organizer, that he can actually get things done. And part of the reason that he's able to get things done is that he's ruthless. He doesn't care. If you want to put a stop or slow down the revolution, you'll find a horse head in your bed. He does not mind slitting your throat if you're going to be a problem. But because they saw him as a threat, the Tsar saw him as a threat, he had to leave Russia. He's essentially exiled from Russia, but while he's exiled, he is still planning this revolution. So what leads up to the Russian Revolution? First thing you have is the Russo-Japanese War, obviously between the Russians and the Japanese. The Japanese destroy the Russians. And nobody thought that was going to happen. This was actually kind of a scare for the rest of the world also, because nobody thought that Japan was that powerful. But because they lost, now the people are not happy with the Russian government. You also have something called Bloody Sunday, where you have a series of protesters who are protesting all of the negatives of the Russian government and the Tsar, and they are shot and killed by the Tsar's soldiers. And then you also have World War I. The problem is that there are a lot of people in Russia. There are. And you would think that would mean that they had a great army, but they don't. They have a lot of numbers, but they're not prepared to fight any kind of war. And they end up losing a lot of men because of their being unprepared. So the Russian Revolution isn't actually just one revolution. It's a series of revolutions, the first of which is the March Revolution that happens in March of 1917. You have a series of strikes. You have that proletariat, the workers, that decide to start striking against the government. And because the soldiers are fed up with the government and they're starting to side with the people, they're going to side with the strikers in this case. And because if you have all of the proletariat, all of your workers, and you have all of your Tsar soldiers all on one side, you get an uprising. And because the uprising was so large, the Tsar actually decides that he's going to abdicate his throne. Nicholas II is going to step down from the throne. But now we don't have a government. So they set up a provisional government, which is essentially a temporary government. But this temporary government, this provisional government, decides that they're going to continue to fight World War I. So this is going to make a lot of people mad because they're still not prepared. Just because we have new government doesn't mean that they're any better prepared to fight against the world powers. And so a lot of people are angry. So what they try to do in order to help out the country a little bit is to try to set up Soviets. Soviets are like local councils where they're going to ask for the opinion of the people and see how it works. But it's not working that great. But luckily for the Russians, Lenin's going to come back with the help of Germany. You would think that's weird. So Russia is actually fighting against Germany in World War I. But Germany is going to help Lenin come back into Russia? What? The reason why is because they thought that it would hurt Russia's war effort. That if they bring in this revolutionary that's going to severely cripple the Russian forces in the war, then why not do it? In our next lecture, we're going to look at exactly what Lenin did when he came back and took control. Because now we've built up to the revolution, we've gotten a little bit to the peak in his return. There's going to be a little bit more in the next one about what else happened, and then kind of all of the aftermath of the Russian Revolution. So guys, make sure that you get all of this information down. I will be checking the notes first thing of our next lecture. And then any questions that you have here, make sure to go back and write them down, because we will have time, a little bit of time in the next class to review any questions that you have about this particular lecture.